All right, China part 9. Here we go. We're picking up with people, problems, and challenges based on China's demographics. So, Joey's just playing with some slime right here. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Cool, buddy. Yeah, yeah.
Joey, show the girls your binoculars. Can you
Look
look
at
up
the
and
computer with your binoculars. Yeah, looking for birds. Yeah. And party squirrels. He calls all squirrels party squirrels because of an episode of Bubble Guppies. All right, so economics and economic problems and challenges presented by the massive number of people in China. That's what we're talking about here. All right, so um, for China, one of the biggest things they have to do as a communist country is they have to provide jobs for everybody. That's a big idea of communism as they try to create this classless society is that the workers have the power, the ordinary people have the power, and that everybody has a job and the government provides for everybody. Well, as China started to modernize with the four modernizations, we started to see some capitalism, some private ownership come in. And what we have seen since the four modernizations is this strange hybrid in China with their economics. We have some capitalism, and we know capitalism. Private property is owned privately by like specific individuals or companies. You invest money to make money, and then you get to keep the profits. That's the opposite of communism. Communism is when the government 100% controls the economy. They create the jobs, they create everything. They give everybody a standard salary and a standard wage. Everybody's equal. China's trying to balance those two things together in their economics. Communism, where the government controls everything, and capitalism, where the market and the people control what goes on in the economic system. It's a weird mix. It's not supposed to work. And honestly, it doesn't very well. So one of the big things China has to do is try to provide jobs. Well, they have some companies that are owned by the government. They call these publicly owned companies. A lot of times they don't run very well, but it's hard for the government to close them down because if they do, then everyone that works there is going to lose their jobs. The government also really doesn't tell the capitalistic side much of what to do. They let them run things however they want to. So there's this weird power balance in China with economics of who's really in control. It's the government at the end of the day, but they have a hard time giving everybody jobs. They really have to keep an eye on their unemployment rate and try to keep it low. And the only thing they can really do to try to keep it low is to give everybody a little plot of land and have them be farmers, but that leads to an incredibly high poverty rate. So in China, there's huge gaps between rich and poor, and the majority of the population is poor and lives in poverty. The majority of the population, honestly, are rural farmers. Young people try to move to the cities to get jobs, but the market's very competitive. There's no minimum wage. Workers are treated very poorly. They have very few rights because workers are not seen as valuable. There's such a large pool of labor, and there's no regulation over how you treat your workers or what you pay them or health standards or anything like that, that the workers are not seen as valuable. They're seen as easily replaceable, so they have very few rights. Sweatshops are very common, as is the exploitation of child labor. Factory conditions are so terrible, and watch a few videos about those later. Factories have to do strange things. Most of us, like right now, I'm reading my notes off an Apple phone. All right. And that means I have contributed to terrible working conditions in China. The Apple factory in China had so many suicides occurring that they had to lock the doors to the roof, and they literally put nets up around the roof of the Apple factories in China so that if someone tries to go up there and jump off the roof to take their own life to try to protest the terrible treatment, they can't do it because there's a net there to prevent them from doing so. So there's some very serious worker problems in China. Their workers are not treated well, and it's really hard for China to keep everybody working and to maintain a low unemployment rate. And it's very hard for them to balance this capitalist communist mix they have that isn't supposed to happen. That they're total opposites of one another. So there's lots of economic problems. Another one of them is pollution. And pollution is really a common economic problem. And that's really where most pollution problems come from. They're economic. They're not social. They're not necessarily political. Pollution typically comes from companies who are doing something that is not good for the environment, but it's good for their profits, right? It's easier to pollute than it is to do things clean because that would involve a change. right? And as you'll see in a couple of videos we'll watch later, China kind of ignores pollution problems in the name of economic growth. And honestly, we do that in the United States too. Like one of the biggest companies in Wisconsin is Menards. Menards gets fined every year for terrible dumping violations of chemical waste into the environment, but the fine is so low, it doesn't matter. It's cheaper for them to pay the fine than to dispose of those things in the correct way. So China sees a lot of problems with pollution that they largely ignore or overlook so that their economy doesn't slow down, so they don't cause any ripples into the economy. Air and water pollution are very high, very dangerous. I think it's 18 out of the 20 most air polluted cities in the world are in China. Industrial pollution is the main factor. And again, the industrial work is very dangerous. There's very little regulation. People are exposed to these chemicals, both people working in the factories and in the facilities and people that live around them. Lots of polluted air, lots of polluted drinking water, high cancer rates, lots of problems from the pollution that goes along with their economic growth. And again, we'll get some more about that a little bit later in the unit when we watch a couple videos, short videos about some of China's modern problems. All right, so the next set of demographic problems I want to look at are political problems. A little sip of coffee. Keep that caffeine train rolling, baby. All right, so China has to really maintain strict control over their political system so that the Communist Party stays in charge. Right? It's a one-party totalitarian state. Opposition is not allowed. Second, third, fourth parties are not allowed. The communists are in control. The People's Republic Party is in control. They're not a republic. So the Chinese government has to strictly control information because the communist ideology is honestly weakening. And a part of that is the institution of capitalism that came after 1989. Again, more coming on that later. But China needs to strictly control information. China has very, very heavy censorship. And in general, the people of China have very few rights. Rights are very limited in China because the more rights you have, the more change you may want, the more political control the people may want, and China's government doesn't want the people to have control. They don't want the people to have rights because then they're going to demand that they change. They're going to demand more of a voice in their government. They're going to demand more access to things like education and healthcare. They're going to demand a minimum wage, an end to sweatshop labor, an end to the industrial pollution, right? So the government is very strictly controlled by the Communist Party, and the people have very few rights. And again, there's so many people that this is a huge problem for the government. This is something they have to work very hard at. But in general, you don't have free speech. You don't have freedom of expression. You kind of have freedom of religion, but not really. There's not freedom of the press. There's all the information that comes out of China comes from the government. It's heavily censored. It's idealized, as they call it, or harmonized, as they like to call it, which basically means it's fake information. So their information is not good. They censor the news and the internet heavily. There's no freedom of information. People have no idea what the internet really looks like in China. It is so different than what we know today. And as the economy improves, more people want rights. More people want access to information. More people want better wages and benefits because the middle class is growing as the economy improves. But the government doesn't want this. So there's lots of political problems in China that we'll get some more information about from a couple short videos. But the Communist Party is trying to stay in power, and the people are trying to take the power back. And that's a major issue for China. And that leads to lots of human rights issues and abuses from the Chinese government. So when it comes to human rights, the basic idea that humans should have rights and you don't need to earn them. You're just born and you get them. Right? Very American idea, big part of the American Revolution. Every country has problems with them, right? There's no country out there that has a perfect human rights record. Every country has some human rights violations. Like even the United States, we get some knocks from human rights organizations around the world for our treatment of criminals or people accused of crimes, people trying to enter our country. So we get it. All right, we get some knocks. We have some human rights problems and some human rights issues. China has a lot. All right, like one thing is you can't be a critic of the government. If you are too heavily critical of the government, you're jailed or you're put into a work camp. All right, there's even widespread rumors of the government killing citizens and killing people who speak out against the government. I mean, imagine if that was the case in the United States. There wouldn't be anybody left. Right? Everybody criticizes the government. It's actually something that keeps the power of the government in check. and helps the government run more efficiently. That's not the case in China. You can't speak out against the government, or you're jailed, put into a work camp, or in some cases even killed. All right, so that's a huge human right violation. Their criminal justice system is very corrupt. Their economy is very corrupt. Their political system is very corrupt. All of these things are heavy with violations of human rights and corruption. We'll get a little bit more about some of those again in a couple little videos that we'll watch next week in this unit. There's also a lot of human rights violations when it comes to religion. Muslims face very heavy persecution in China. In the West, Muslims in the West, people who practice Islam in the western parts of China face very heavy persecution, and Christians do as well. China's more open to their traditional kind of like folk religion, so they're more open to like Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism. They're way open to Confucianism and Taoism. They're less open to Buddhism, but still a little more open because it's more of like a Chinese idea. They're not very open to Christianity or Islam or Muslims at all. Tibet is a area that is under Chinese control that always wants to be free. It's a very Buddhist area. They honestly should probably be an independent country, but the government prevents that from happening, and the government violently suppresses freedom movements. So whenever the Buddhists dissent, disagree, protest, it's violently put down. There's a lot of Buddhist monks in Tibet who have some very odd means of protesting Chinese control. Many of them set themselves on fire to try to protest Chinese control over their area. It's crazy. And that's their way of trying to protest China's treatment towards them. But the Chinese don't want the area of Tibet to become independent. They want to keep it under control because it increases their power. And they don't want the people in that area to be overly loyal to Buddhism, because then they're not loyal to the Chinese state, to the communist government. So there's lots of human rights violations. I mean, those are just a few. Like for all of this slide, the people, problems, challenges, the demographic issues, and the problems they present, this is all just like a really thin, broad overview. We'll watch some videos to get some more information on this stuff, and then you guys will have an opportunity to explore some of it on your own as well. So there's a lot of different things going on in modern China. I mean, and again, like I just said, like this is a skim. This is a skim of what's going on. Now, a big thing we need to understand is an event that happened in 1989 that started to cause a lot of these changes. All right, it's going to cause a lot of economic changes. It's going to be the event that introduces capitalism into China's society, economy, and politics. It's going to cause lots of political changes. It's also an example of a gross human rights violation. And a lot of it is based on demographics, the growth of the middle class that was happening in 1989. So all of these things are very well embodied in the Tiananmen Square protests, the Tiananmen Square crackdown, and then the change that happened after Tiananmen Square. And that's what we're going to turn our attention to next. All right, so China, you know, we've learned a lot since the beginning about how the ideals of the dynasty impacted the development of government, about how interactions with foreigners impacted the development of government, how Mao Zedong and the Communist Party influenced the development of government, and now how the massive population of China impacts the activities of the government and presents all these problems to the government. But to really understand how China has risen from, honestly, a relatively not very powerful country to probably the second or third most powerful country in the world today, we've got to understand Tiananmen Square and the impact that it has on all of these things. So that's what we're going to turn our attention to next. If you've been noticing, I've been slowly adding to my little cartoon guy over on the wall. Boop, there we go. Just a silly little cartoon guy. I've been drawing versions of this little cartoon character since my cartooning class in 7th grade. I wish I could remember that teacher's name. I don't remember it, but I loved my cartooning class. So I had all kinds of different little characters. We had to eventually make like a cartoon book. So I had a bunch of different characters. Just giant head, little body, which is a very easy cartooning technique for any of you out there looking. So I draw all kinds of versions of that guy. But just something to spice it up a little bit, ladies, right? As we enter into and maintain the world of virtual classrooms. I miss you guys. You're doing a great job. All right, keep up with the quizzes and the discussions. Let me know what questions you have and how I can help. So when we come back next time, we'll start to talk about Tiananmen Square. I'll do a little intro, and then we're going to watch one of my favorite documentaries of all time about Tiananmen Square called Tank Man. All right, but until then, I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Be good to yourselves. Adios, ladies. See you next time. Thanks.